Hello everyone. The construction of Nigeria's Ajaokuta Steel Project began in 1979, after the contracts were signed earlier in 1976 with a consortium of Soviet and Russian firms led by Technopromexport, and the blast furnace technology for steel making was adopted for the plant. By the early 1980s, work had stalled amid Nigeria's economic crises, falling oil revenues, and sudden policy shifts. Steelmaking operations never began, and no blast furnace was commissioned. Unfortunately, the steel plant remains largely incomplete and non-functional. So, what are the chances of resuscitating the Ajaokuta steel complex and making it efficient and competitive today, especially using the same old blast furnace technology from the 1980s? In this video by Africa Rebound, we explore the alternative options based on several critical factors. And at the end of the video, we make specific submissions for the consideration of Nigeria's policymakers. First, Ajaokuta Steel's technology is a very old method for producing steel. The blast furnaces, built in the late 1970s and early 1980s, are rated at 1 to 2 million tons per year capacity, but they consume around 700 to 900 kilograms of coke per ton of hot metal produced, plus about 5 megawatt-hour of energy per ton. That's many times more inefficient than modern steel-making lines, using electric arc furnaces, or EAFs, or direct reduced iron, DRI, paired with EAF systems. Today, global steelmakers achieve energy consumption levels as low as about 500 kilowatts-hour per ton, using EAFs, which are typically fueled by electricity, gas, and recycled scrap. Fuel and power supplies remain chronic constraints in Nigeria. Electricity supply is unsteady, and gas pipeline infrastructure is inadequate. Reviving old blast furnace systems would likely operate at 85 to 90% inefficiency, thereby incurring massive fuel and utility costs. 2. Capital expenditure and private sector financing is challenging. Completing the legacy blast furnace infrastructure could cost between $3 to $5 billion in current terms, factoring in decades of decay, vandalization, corrosion, and the needed retrofit. Retrofitting for partial modernization adds more costs and greater complexity, and will still leave the technology fundamentally dated. In contrast, privately built modular EAF steel mini-mills with 500,000 to 1 million ton per annum capacity typically cost $500 million to $1 billion using modern automation, scrap-based steel, and flexible energy sources. Doing so allows staged expansion, scaling gradually, and aligning with electric and gas supplies. Finally, let's look at the market reality of global steel overcapacity. Steel is among the most globally traded commodities. As of the early 2020s, global steel production capacity exceeded demand by about 20 to 30%, largely driven by China, India, and Turkey. Nigeria currently imports over 3 million tons of steel annually, both semi-finished and finished, mostly from Asia and Europe, often at a cost of under $550 to $600 per ton. So even if Ajaokuta Steel were technically functional using 1980s blast furnace, its cost per ton, due to energy inefficiencies, idle parts and logistics, would likely exceed $750 to $900 per ton, making it uncompetitive both domestically and internationally. Over the past 40 years, Ajaokuta Steel's revival has been attempted repeatedly under different governments. First, there were the military regimes back in the 1980s and 90s, then the Obasanjo civilian government from 2003 to 2007, which tried partial rehabilitation. But the contractors weren't just willing to invest in an obsolete design. Fast forward to 2023, and negotiations around a public-private partnership reached terms with Russian and Indian firms, but still, no contract has been executed, and the project remains unfunded. Chronic issues like overlapping institutional oversight between the Federal Ministry of Steel Development and the Kogi state government, plus poor maintenance, asset vandalism, unresolved land ownership claims, and legal disputes have all seriously undermined investor confidence. So, why is sticking with the old blast furnace technology just not a good idea? First off, capital inefficiency is a big one. You end up paying for outdated structures like blast furnace shells, coke ovens, and sinter plants. Then there's the environmental aspect. These 1970s-era steel plants rely on high-carbon coke production. Modern buyers and export markets are increasingly denying access to high-emission steel. due to climate change concerns. There's also the power supply gap. Modern steelmaking needs highly stable electricity, ideally more than 200 megawatts, or captive gas engines. Consistent energy inputs is something Nigeria just can't guarantee cheaply. And there's the domestic raw material mismatch. Sure, Ajaokuta has iron ore reserves nearby, but the metallurgical expertise and beneficiation plants are lacking. In contrast, EAF mills working off scrap metal can start small and grow over time. The real path forward is therefore the modernization of the plant, not just trying to resurrect the past. For example, one viable alternative is to convert Ajaokuta Steel Complex into a steel park with EAF-based facilities. That would mean clearing out unused or unsafe legacy structures, then building a modular mini-mill with 500 to 700,000 tons per year EAF lines, using local scrap or DRI feedstock from gas-based direct reduction. Another option is to set up independent greenfield steel mills elsewhere. Private developers like African steel groups, Nigerian conglomerates, or foreign investors can be incentivized to build modular EAF plants near Lagos and Port Harcourt, closer to port access and more reliable electricity or gas. Nigeria has abundant gas reserves. Estimates exceed 200 trillion cubic feet. Gas-based direct reduction, combined with EAF, is globally proven and much lower in carbon compared to coke-based systems. When we look around the world, countries like India and Vietnam have really set the pace. In the last 10 years, they've built modern steel mills using EAF or direct reduction iron, EAF technology, often producing between 1 and 2 million tons per year. And their steel is actually cost competitive with imports from China. For Nigeria to really compete, it needs to embrace these modern technologies. To wrap things up, reviving Ajaokuta Steel with its original 1970s blast furnace technology just doesn't make sense anymore, technologically, economically, or environmentally. Even if the infrastructure was somehow finished, it would still produce steel at a much higher cost, consume a lot of energy, lack flexibility, and have limited market access. On the other hand, a modern gas-fired modular electric arc furnace or direct reduction iron-based steel plant, whether built on a cleared Ajaokuta site or at a nearby greenfield location, offers much greater promise of faster construction, lower costs, flexibility, a low carbon footprint, and true global competitiveness. Thanks for watching.